Mallard.
I'll go this time.
She stood up and peered at her babies. They're getting so big, aren't they?
They're getting so big. Aren't
Soon they'll be ready to leave the nest.
they? Soon they'll be ready to leave the nest.
I suppose, said Mr. Mallard. By the way, I noticed a school of minnows over near that dock.
By the way, I was going to school by that dog.
Thanks for the tip, she clacked. Thanks
So
for the
that's it.
And watch out for the water snake.
Watch out for the water.
I always do.
I always do.
Mr. Mallard couldn't help but notice there was a lot of activity in the nest that day. The ducklings were climbing all over one another. And the most adventurous had hopped up onto the seawall. Cut it out, he said. You're making a racket. Quack, 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 quack. When Mr. Mallard saw Mrs. Mallard paddle up with a minnow in her bill, he said, thank goodness. By now, things had really gotten out of hand. And as soon as Mrs. Mallard fed the littlest duck, she said,
All right, my ducklings, everyone onto the seawall now.
follow me.
Follow me.
With Mr. Mallard bringing up the rear, she marched them to a spot where the water lapped below. It's time for you to move on, she announced.
It's time for you to move on.
You will jump into the river and swim for the first time.
You'll jump into the river and swim for your first time. Go on, jump in.
You can do it.
You can do it.
She and Mr. Mallard hopped off the wall, and one little duckling followed. The others stayed there, and the others stayed where they were and watched. What's the matter? Said Mr. Mallard. A few minutes ago, you could not stop bouncing. 4 ducklings quacked and jumped in. The last 3 ducklings had become very still. On the count of 3, said Mrs. Mallard.
On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3.
One duckling stared at the sky. Another duckling looked over at the nest. And the third one sat down. A heron, watching from the reeds, spoke up. It's easy, he said.
Easy.
Pretend you're a plane.
Pretend you're a plane.
The duckling who was staring at the sky stretched her neck and opened her wings. The wind caught them and she breezed into the river. The duckling who was staring at the nest noticed a crab buried under the mud. He waved his long claw and said, louder, and jumped in. The duckling leaned forward as far as she could and kerplopped into the water. The duckling splished and splashed. Come on, jump!
Come on, jump!
They said to the last duckling. You can do it, shouted Mrs. Mallard.
You can do it.
The last duckling stood up and waddled to the edge of the wall. She peered down and then returned to the same spot. Get going, said Mr. Mallard.
Get going.
Try again, said Mrs. Mallard.
Try again.
In the river, the ducklings dipped and dove. It's fun in here, they shouted.
It's fun in here.
The duckling stared at her big, wet feet and didn't budge. A painted lady butterfly drifted down. He watched the duckling for a long time and then said, when I hatched from my chrysalis,
That's my Christmas.
I was afraid to move on too. At first I was scared. Small, weak, and too crumpled to fly. But I waited and grew, and soon I could flutter my wings. I wasn't afraid to move on anymore, and I flew away. The duckling stopped staring at her feet and studied the butterfly. Pretend you're a butterfly, he said, and opened her wings. The duckling waddled to the edge. The rest of her brothers and sisters were already swimming around. If they could do it, so could she. She closed her eyes and imagined she was a butterfly. One wing opened, and then another. There was a whoosh, and she felt herself soar into the river, landing with a splash. Shaking the water off her feathers, she quacked.
I did it. That was fun.
As she hurried to catch up, a streak of gold and black appeared above her. I'm so proud of you. Mrs. Mallet swam up.
Me too.
And then Mrs. Mallet swam in a big circle. And everyone followed. One, two, three.
Moving on and growing up might seem scary, but we can do it.
Yeah.